Well, the deadline for payment companies to comply with the Reserve Bank's data localization norms ends today. Remember, in April this year, the central bank directed all payment companies to set up a local ecosystem in order to store transaction data of Indian citizens in India. And while the RBI has ruled out giving any extension so far, the compliance window ends today. Several foreign players have resisted the move and have sought an extension at least for 6 months more. The issue has also taken a political tone, with the U.S. trade representative to the WTO backing American tech companies, saying that they want prohibitions on data localization to ensure free flow of information, free flow of data across borders, unquote. Even as American giants like Visa, MasterCard, Google, Facebook and PayPal continue to hope for a relaxation, the big daddy of them all, that's WhatsApp, has said that it has built a system that will store all payment data locally. So what happens now to payment companies that have not complied with the Reserve Bank's norms? What can we expect from the central bank, and how does this impact Indian users? More importantly, is data security as simple as moving servers locally? These are several questions that we hope to answer over the next 30 minutes, though I'm sure that we're going to find it very hard to do so. But good evening. Thanks very much for joining us on our special show, Eye on India. I'm Shireen Bhan. First up, let's go across to Kevin Lee, who's standing by with a breakdown of the unanswered questions that are left with the Reserve Bank as the compliance window closes today. Kevin.
Well, absolutely. Our first unanswered question is what happens to companies who haven't complied? Big card companies like MasterCard, Visa, American Express are yet to report compliance, and the RBI has made it clear that it doesn't want customers to suffer, so it's likely that these payment companies will continue to function but might be fined for non-compliance. Reports suggest that US-based companies have asked the central bank for another 12 months to comply. Secondly, the RBI has asked companies to get auditors to submit compliance certificates by December. But how will these auditors know if companies are exclusively storing data in India? Do they have jurisdiction to check if copies of this data is present in other countries as well? And what about the middlemen? If I buy something on an Alibaba with my Visa card, then sure, Visa has been mandated to store the transaction data in India. But what about Alibaba and other e-commerce sites? Does the data that they collect from me constitute payment data? And the last and perhaps most important question, is data storage really as simple as we are making it seem? Data is often fragmented, different parts of data often stored in different locations, and what's more, companies have backup copies of this data in case the primary source gets corrupted. Does limiting data to just one set of servers in one country go against the best practices of cybersecurity? Also, data isn't always breached at its physical source. Most cyber attacks take place on websites when the data is being transmitted through the internet. How does data localization prevent that? Now, that's a summary of some of the unanswered questions still lingering. Maybe you'll get some answers from our panelists. Shireen, back to you.
Yes, absolutely. We are going to try and do that, Kevin. Thanks very much. Joining us now to help us answer some of those questions raised, we have with us the founder and CEO of PhonePe, Sameer Nigam, the CEO of PayU, Amrish Rao, cyber law advocate N.S. Napinai, and partner of cybersecurity at EY India, Burgess Cooper. Appreciate you joining us here on the program. Let me first start with Sameer and Amrish. And Sameer, I'll ask you, the deadline ends today. We still haven't heard from the central bank. It looks like there is no intent to provide any kind of relief or any relaxation to the deadline that ends today. Are you in compliance?
Hi, Shireen. Yes, we're in compliance. We actually informed the RBI a couple of weeks back that we've completed 100% localization. So yes, I think we're in good stead.
Okay, so then that is the perfect opportunity for me to put the questions that Kevin raised there. And let's start, Sameer, with the very first one. You know, what did it take for you to actually be able to be in compliance with the Reserve Bank norms that kick in from today? And this business of whether data can be treated so linearly, you know, how challenging is it going to be for others to comply? You know, give me a sense of what your experience has been like and what we can take from there.
Sure. I think it's fair to say that the world of payments has become more complicated with several sort of middle-tier players, aggregators, payment gateways, wallets, etc. But the exercise we undertook starting in April was to identify who are all the partners we actually work with, A good example of that was we worked with a company called Freshdesk, which offers cloud-based customer service solutions. And we realized that some of the transaction data for resolution goes to them. So we had to contact each of the partners we worked with and make sure that they're able to actually pass audit, that they actually are localized as well. Interestingly, most of these players themselves that are using cloud solutions use the geofencing solutions that are publicly available from most of the multinationals themselves. So I think for us, it was more just about putting sort of people on the ground on making sure each of the systems were fully localized. It's fair to say that we were already about 90% there because we are an India-centric player. So all our infrastructure, all our data centers were already in India to begin with, but we had to bring all the service providers and others into the net.
Amrish, what's the experience been like for you? And transactional data really includes end-to-end transaction data, which will include payment data, which could be used for data warehousing, marketing, fraud analytics, any other supplementary services. A lot of this, as we just heard from Samir, also outsourced to third parties, etc. What's been the challenge for you, and what do you believe will be challenging going forward from here on? You know, the argument of whether data localization or good or bad ends today, because unless we hear from the Reserve Bank, it's here to stay.
Yeah, so Shireen, we process about 20 lakh transactions on a daily basis, and these are largely online payment transactions. For us, it's been relatively easy because as a company, which we are a homegrown, India-grown business, so our entire platform set was in India. So very little challenges in terms of getting the localization, tick mark. I guess what is important is you got to understand where RBI is coming from, right? What RBI is saying is, I need to have supervisory access. That's point one. Second, they are saying that I need to protect the data. And something which they are not saying, but is really underlying to all of this is, I want to protect the payment systems of the country. You know, just a few years back, we had a situation where Russia went into sanctions from the US, and we suddenly have the two big networks which were not processing transactions in the Russian market, and that became extremely difficult for the economy. I guess we don't want to see something similar in India. RBI over the years has taken steps like promoting NPCI, coming up with RuPay, UPI, and that has really given us a good standing. And this is really a next step in the evolution. So I think it's a very important step. I guess what is important to mention here is the second part around data localization is around having the data only in India. I think that is an interesting position because what it does is, in some cases, it will not allow us to share data and cause situations where some innovations or some disruptive ideas which could be global, which could be brought down to India through best practices, I think that could take a little bit longer. So we've got to be careful on this one, how we go through the second part of the implementation, which is around, can this data be mirrored outside of the country or not? The short answer is we are fully ready, we are fully compliant to what RBI
well, so far... Okay, fully ready, and from what I hear from you, you're okay with mirroring as well, which has been the argument that has been made. But so far, the Reserve Bank as well as the government haven't given in on the mirroring argument either. But let me go across to Burgess Cooper now. And Burgess, just to add to what Amrish was saying, the RBI doesn't just want access, it wants unfettered access to data. But how do you really see this? And let's raise those questions, Burgess. I believe that of the 70-odd payment operators, 60 are in compliance. The big ones, the American multinationals, are not in compliance just yet. So what can the Reserve Bank do? We don't know whether it's going to penalize them. We understand, and this is again source-based information, that transactions will not be disrupted. So what should we prepare ourselves for?
So thanks, Sharon. I think the first reason why this isn't gotten is on the name of security, which is a main reason. There's also the other reason why, in case of a hack or a data breach, how easy will it be for the operator or for the investigating agencies to be able to have access to that data? During a breach, you don't want to go around seeking permission from different entities across the world asking for that. So while it's clearly a security requirement, the main reason is the ease of access which the investigating agencies can have during a breach. And that's one of the main reasons why this has happened. Are we alone in this? No, there are other countries like Russia, there's China, there's parts of Europe who have done that. Is it going to be difficult? Yes, difficult, but also an opportunity. Many Indian firms and companies who provide IT infrastructure and data centers can actually capitalize on this opportunity, and make centers in India. So it's not all tough work. It also opens up a center or an opportunity for companies who want to do more in India to leverage this. Will it be difficult? Yes, we've heard of senators in the US and the Indian IT industry, sort of being at risk, but that's all part of the game. It's rightfully so. When you have a breach, you want access to all data, you want unfettered access. I think that is the main reason for this ask.
Yeah. Okay, that's the main reason for this ask. Samir, you wanted to make a quick point before I get Napina in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to draw a distinction on the data mirroring discussion. I think what Amrish brought out is important. If there's a case, when there's a case, should mirroring of data from India to outside be allowed? I think that's a discussion that actually hasn't happened. What the RBI has objected to is players saying we'll process and store data outside and mirror to India. What the RBI is saying is that this has to be the place where all services are delivered from. Mirroring outside is a discussion that hasn't really even...
Welcome back. You're watching Eye on India, and we're discussing the hot topic of data localization and what it means for India. Now, let me quote to you what the Sri Krishna Committee report says. The Sri Krishna Committee report says data critical to an Indian national interest should be processed in India, as this will minimize the vulnerability of relying solely on undersea cables. It then goes on to say the objective will be served if even a single live serving copy of such personal data is located in India. It then goes on to say, however, the processing of such data exclusively within India may be necessary for the benefits as discussed below, which are security and being able to access, unfettered access, and so on and so forth. But Napina, let me come to you now. The mirroring argument, because again, we have so far not officially heard from either the government or the Reserve Bank on whether mirroring will be something that they might want to consider. So far, we haven't heard, but unofficially, we're being told that that's a no-go area. What is your point of view?
Shireen, I think you're in a panel for once where everybody seems to agree, and I agree with the panel that the data localization with respect to RBI, seeking it for financial data is not something that is way off the mark. It's needed, and it falls within the criteria which Justice Sri Krishna Committee specifically put out as critical personal data. So given that, and the fact that the Act also, the draft bill rather, says that, the government can carve out a specific a specific category of critical personal data and say that it should be retained only in India is already recognized. Now, the other arguments that have been put forth with respect to mirroring, what Samir is saying is actually true, that nobody has talked about a reverse mirroring. Everyone talks about mirroring to India, not from India to outside. So that may be an interesting debate. What is going to be the crux of that debate is going to be the following. One, every service provider, irrespective of whether they are within the net of the RBI, is using some payment gateway which is within the net of RBI. So RBI effectively what it has done is it has stymied all the commercial players online by just catching hold of the payment gateways. So whether you are an online e-commerce site or you are a payment gateway, you've become by default amenable to this. So given this limitation, most of the commercial or let's say e-commerce sites, for instance, are going to have trouble retaining all the data inside India. RBI circular does not extend to e-commerce sites. It only extends to payment systems which are subject to the regulation by RBI.
Payment sites,
So therefore, since there is a gap over there, there is a lot of opacity. No, for payment sites, payment gateways, they have to maintain it in India. There is no quibble about that. But with respect to
I'm saying e-commerce websites,
there is some confusion on what is it that they have to do.
And I think that
is the same financial data.
And that is a use case that
are not amenable to regulation.
So I'll interrupt you there because this is Sure, because this is a use case that that Kevin brought up as well, that if I use a Visa card to buy something on Alibaba, RBI ensures that Visa stores, and by the way, Visa yet so far is not in compliance. RBI ensures that Visa stores the payment data of that transaction in India. But what about any records that Alibaba keeps? What constitutes payment data, especially when it comes to an e-commerce website? And as you pointed out, Napinai, the RBI is not looking at e-commerce websites. So what happens then to a situation like this?
As you said earlier.
So the only thing is we'll have to wait for the draft data protection bill to become law.
See, I think Shireen, the bigger point out there is that
we'll have to wait for the bill.
Sorry, if I may just complete, I was just saying that
who does the consumer actually belong? So because in this example of an Alibaba transaction, there are many parts who actually claim to that consumer or to that transaction. So Alibaba can very easily turn around and say that the consumer belongs to me. I need to have that financial data with me because there is chargeback, there is servicing the consumer, there are refunds which I have to do, so I need the data. That's one. Second, if there is a Visa and Master, the card company which has issued the card can very easily turn around and say, the consumer belongs to me. The merchant where the transaction is being conducted, the merchant can turn around and say that the processor which has provided me with the payment gateway or the terminal out there, the transaction belongs to them. So there are different people in the value chain which can claim access to that data, and they have the right to hold that data. I guess what RBI is saying out there very clearly is that the persons involved in processing the transaction, and in this case, the payments companies out there, they need to go ahead and hold the data locally. I think they're completely silent about where the data sits from a e-commerce standpoint. And I do believe that if the transaction is a global, any which ways the global leg of the transaction can get stored outside of the country. So there has been clarity which has been provided by RBI over the last few months. The other thing which is very interesting is RBI has been super consultative in this whole process. I can tell you from my personal experiences, they have literally reached out to us on a 10-day basis. The deputy governor level has also been involved into various conversations. I think they have been very open in explaining the rationale and working with us. I guess the only conversation is, have they given us enough, sorry, not us, but other parties who are non-compliant, is 6 months a good enough a window or not? I guess that's the debate. Luckily, I don't need to bother.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need to bother about it, neither does Samir Nigam. So, Burgess, let me ask you that, the clarifications that will perhaps be required from the central bank. We just gave an example of one transaction, Visa via Alibaba, e-commerce website. I mean, there will be a lot of these use cases that will perhaps require much more by way of clarity from the Reserve Bank. Outline for us where you see the challenges and the grey areas.
So I think any company which has to now comply will have 4 stages. The first stage where we'll do a map gap and find out what is the state of compliance or non-compliance, how much data are they storing locally, and what parts of it are they outside the country. Once you get that, they'll have to do a data localization architecture review and see how can they get the data back in this country. The third part would be implement the local data in-country systems. And once all that has been checked and reviewed by auditors, then give a compliance certificate to the RBI saying, hey guys, we have done whatever it takes and we are compliant. Just one perspective out here, while talking about the data from RBI, even the telecom industry has had this for many years, where no amount of telecom data of any subscriber, except a roaming subscriber, is allowed to leave the Indian shores. So there is precedence on this earlier in some sort of way.
Okay, there is precedence in some sort of way. But, let's just talk about the other point that Kevin had raised in terms of auditors. What will the auditors be looking at? How will the audit be conducted? Will they have jurisdiction to check if the data is being sent out to other countries, to check if copies of data abroad have been deleted, etc.? Napinai, let me put that question to you. Do you see challenges with the audit process itself?
The actual verification may in fact cause some challenges, because when data is stored on a cloud system, verifying the exact location of the data becomes a challenge. But otherwise, legally, there are no impediments for auditors to do this verification. Once a payment system is registered with the RBI, they've subjected themselves to the regulation. And they will have to comply with all the guidelines and the follow-out that comes through that. Therefore, the auditors would be fully within their rights to do this, to do the verification process, and RBI will be fully within its rights to then take action for violation. It's a public policy move which RBI has done, and it would definitely stand the test of constitutionality. One other issue that was raised was with respect to access to data. Anything that is done in India would have to follow due process. So even if RBI is saying unfettered access, it would still have to set forth a procedure which will sustain the due process test. So with that done, then there would be no impediment really for an audit process.
Let me start by asking you, Amrish, since you raised the issue, and then I'll get all of our other panelists to comment on that and close the show, because that perhaps is going to be a challenge that needs to be addressed if we don't want to close the Indian startup ecosystem, the Indian fintech ecosystem from the rest of the world, which is being raised as a key cause for concern. Amrish, your thoughts on the reverse mirroring idea and what the Reserve Bank, since you said that they're very consultative, what the Reserve Bank ought to do?
So look, I think, we need to find a way in the best practices being utilized in the country, allow us to innovate, and that really requires partnering with some of the external companies, and that's what's been happening. I used to have my own startup, and I'm a big believer of this concept that Indian startups should have what is called as level playing field. And for example, in what we are doing on keeping systems on the ground here in India, getting some cost increase for foreign competition, I think that's fair. But when it comes to protection, I'm not in support for that, because protection, what it does is doesn't really create an environment for innovation and disruption. So when it comes to mirroring not being allowed, I think it borders on the lines of protection, and somehow just doesn't pass merit with me today.
Napina and Burgess, I'll give you the final say because we're completely out of time. Burgess, very quickly, your final thoughts on the road ahead.
So I think it's a good technology alternative by mirroring data. And data here, not the system of transaction, but also surrounding systems like fraud and analytics. It will help in BCP and DR scenarios in case you have a system data outside the country. But it's a technology alternative. From a compliance perspective, the debate goes on, and we'll see what's allowed.
Napinai.
Legally, Shireen, I would say that data localization, legally, I would say data localization, especially of financial data, as Samir rightly put it, is much needed. There is no real reason for companies to seek mirroring outside India. Whatever data analytics that they want to do, they can always do it within India. That would also ensure further business opportunities within India. And finally, as a last word, we are only talking about an RBI circular today. Tomorrow, the draft data protection bill will come into play as an enactment, and that would provide the gaps, or rather it would fill the gaps which the RBI circular has left with respect to other players such as e-commerce sites. On what they should or should not do with financial data.
All right, and those are the questions should not be doing. Well, we're completely out of time on this show, but as we can see, there is still a lot that's up for discussion and debate, as well as clarifications from the Reserve Bank, much awaited, especially when it comes to e-commerce transactions. But for this evening, Samir Nigam, Amrish Rao, NS Napinai and Burgess Cooper, appreciate you joining us on this special. We'll take a break and come right back with a lot more.